Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. Today, I would like to start a series of several videos over the next few weeks that will detail various issues involving crimes that are committed and how it is possible to fight or analyze whether they can be fought in immigration court and or in front of immigration. This has been a particularly complex and evolving area of immigration law, and it would require some very serious analysis of the particular crime and statute which you might have been convicted under. Now, just so you know, you can't just call up an immigration attorney and say, I've been convicted of this and that. Am I going to be in trouble? They can give you, a decent analysis of generally what would be the situation and what might happen. But in order to get down to the dirty and determine whether or not there is a significant possibility of success, it does need to go through essentially a multi-part analysis of the particular crime and whether or not it does fall under the categories involved as to deportability and removability. So in this particular video, I'd like to talk about the what is called the reasonable probability test and what that means and how it might apply, and it gives some examples of how it's used in order to try to defeat or not defeat, if the case may be, the deportability. So basically somebody commits a crime, let's say, and one of the issues is whether or not they have committed a crime of moral turpitude. Okay, and if they've committed the crime of moral turpitude or a crime involving moral turpitude, then the chances are it is a deportable crime, and they may be put into removal proceedings and or need some kind of waiver. So over the years, there's been different ways of analyzing whether or not a crime involves a moral turpitude and whether or not it makes someone deportable. And I have other videos, and I'm going to get other videos on this subject so that eventually when you watch all the videos, it'll put it all together for you. But at first, there's analyzing under what's called the categorical approach. Okay. And the categorical approach generally is when you look at all of just the statutory language of the crime. So every crime, has statutory language in it that makes it so that they and anyone is legally put on notice of what constitutes the crime. So this is why I'm saying that as immigration attorneys, we need to actually look at the statutory language upon which you were convicted. So we look at the crime, and let's say it has 5 different subsections. Okay, and I'm just talking in general now, but let's say it's got 5 different subsections, and let's say that immigration brings you into immigration court and says you committed a crime of moral turpitude based on whatever this particular crime is, and then you, as the immigration attorney or an immigration attorney, goes in and they argue that, well, um, this particular statute has several different parts, of which it is unclear which part the person who's in removal proceedings actually committed. Let's say that of the 5 parts, they committed 4 of them, but not the 5th one. And then, it's possible to say, well, since we don't know that it falls under that 5th one, that the person might not have been considered to have uh, fallen under that particular crime as far as the categorical analysis is defined. Now, The reasonable probability test essentially says that, and the reason I brought up the categorical analysis first is because what would happen is attorneys, in years past would go in there and they would say, well, it is possible that one can commit this crime by doing A, B, and C. And I mean, they could think of all kinds of manner upon which the crime could be committed, where if it was under these theoretical possibilities, then it would not be considered a crime of moral turpitude. And the lawyers are creative, so we were able to think of all kinds of um, scenarios where a crime might be committed but not fall under the definition of the federal definition of what constituted the crime. So courts and so forth saw what was happening, and they essentially put what's called a reasonable probability test in place. Now, the reasonable probability test means that if your attorney's going to go in there and is going to argue that this particular crime, whatever you were convicted under, falls could fall under a particular situation, thereby not making it so that you would be deportable as far as, when this would be compared with the federal offense. The courts are saying, well, wait up. You have to show that there is a, quote, reasonable probability, end quote, that the court in that state would actually and has actually prosecuted this particular crime. So, let's just, I'll just give a far out example. Let's say you're talking about battery. Okay, and let's say the statute says something to the effect the intentional or we'll talk about assault, the intentional hitting of someone else. Okay. And let's say that the attorney goes in there and says, well, that someone else could theoretically be a tiger. So you could theoretically um, hit a tiger instead of another, somebody else, meaning, which they obviously intended to be a person, and still be convicted of, assault. And the court would say, under the reasonable probability test, the court would say, okay, fine. They say, counsel, you're correct. Theoretically, based on the language of the statute, you could hit a tiger and be convicted of assault. Now, counsel, show me a case where that has actually happened. Show me a case where there's a reasonable probability that the state has brought action against somebody for hitting a tiger. Okay, and again, this is a ludicrous example, if you want to call it that, but it makes the point, right? So, if it doesn't pass the reasonable probability test, then it is considered a crime of moral turpitude, and it is a deportable offense. So that all in all is the reasonable probability test. So if you're going to go in there and the attorney's going to make the arguments as to alternative ways or peculiar ways that the crime might apply outside the federal definition, then there needs to be proof brought in that there's been actual convictions on that particular item. Okay, so if you like the video, click like, subscribe. More in the coming weeks. Thank you.